You're listening to the Bulldog Hour, getting you inside the Wilson football program with weekly game previews, recaps, highlights, and interviews. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bulldog Hour. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Mays, and not with me tonight is Justin Raffoff, but that's okay. We called up our designated hitter, and with us once again here is Mr. Paul Roberts. Paul, how are you doing?
Hopefully able to hit a little bit better than the Phillies did today in the DH role. But thanks for having me on. It's always fun to talk some football.
Yeah, and actually have you here in person in the Bulldog Hour studios tonight.
Yeah, this is quite a room. I'll tell you, it would take me several hours to go through all this memorabilia that you have down here.
It's like one of those search and find books. You know, I'll give you a list and you have to find it. You know, there will be a quiz at the end. But no, we're very happy that you could fill in for Justin. We love having you there, and we always get a great response when we have you on, whether it's this one talking high school sports, high school football, or on the regular show when we're just talking everything. I know tonight we could talk about the NBA playoffs and golf, but we're going to focus on Wilson football. That's what we're going to do this evening. But definitely happy to have you on here. And, you know, we have a good show. I said to you beforehand that normally, Justin and I do this 3 times in the off season because Wilson football is always in demand. But honestly, this off season, there hasn't been a lot of information out there. Everyone's kind of been focusing on other things. High school sports, at least not the active high school sports, were pushed to the back burner. But once the summer got here, things opened up. Spring practice at the end of May or early June for a lot of teams around the county. And just this week, Wilson hosted their 7-on-7 after a year hiatus because of the coronavirus pandemic. They got to host that again. And I know yesterday was the annual Bulldog Open, one of the big fundraisers for the Wilson football team. So, yes, you know, whether you like it or not, I think we here, Paul and I and Justin, we enjoy Wilson football as soon as we can think about it. But there are plenty of you out there. They're probably not listening. They're like, you're talking high school football already? It's Father's Day. It's mid-June. It's not even the 4th of July. What are you doing?
I'll say, though, West Lawn is one of those areas where you could probably talk high school football 365 days out of the year.
And Justin and I do pretty much. So that's kind of the reason that we have this show. So, but yeah, let's we'll do my little housekeeping here at the beginning of the episode where we thank the people that make this show possible, and by and large that is by my dad and May's Sandwich Shop sponsoring us since the beginning of the show. Believe it or not, we're in season 7 of this rebooted Bulldog Hour, you know, that started back with Coach Contafio and Coach Brubaker hosted it in, you know, the early 2000s. That was a big deal then, and Justin and I brought it back before the 2015 season. So yeah, season 7, and we thank my dad and May's Sandwich Shop for that, as well as our anonymous donor. You know, we're in a new season, and once again, one of our anonymous donors already reached out and helped us financially, which is always a great thing to do. And we appreciate the support in any way that we get it. You know, we offer sponsorships and advertising. You heard last year, Small Player, Big Play was a big one on these shows. But we take the in-kind donations. We very much appreciate it. Definitely check out the website. BulldogHour.com is a great place for Wilson football, both past and present. I have a whole archive up there where I went through many of the seasons one by one, especially late 80s, early 90s, late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I've got like a 15-year where you can see every game, every article, everything up there. So definitely check that out. And Justin's not here, so I'll say it. Spread the word, like and share the stuff that we put out there. That absolutely helps us in a big way. So here we are, episode 2 of season 7. The next show will be the start of our weekly live shows. That'll be August 8th. Justin and I will start our weekly shows. We start August 8th, and we're going to go to, well, we always like to say at least Thanksgiving. That's always the goal here at the Bulldog Hour. We want to be talking Wilson football until we're eating turkey. So that's the hope. But that pretty much takes care of everything I need to say. So let's get to talking about the 2021 Wilson football season. Paul, let's start with the roster. I know we talked about amazingly 4 months ago when we had you on the premiere episode for this 7th season about returning starters and key contributors. So let's take a little bit more of an in-depth look at those names to know, as I'm calling them now, on offense, because at this point in time, it's tough for us quasi outsiders to know exactly who's going to start. So I'm not necessarily saying these people are going to be the ones under center in the trenches or catching the balls or whatever, but these are the names you're probably most likely to hear. And we got to start at quarterback because that's the one that everyone wants to hear us talk about.
Kind of an important position.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the way things have revolved around it. Maybe not always the case in West Lawn, as we'll get to later when we talk about our top 5 quarterbacks in Wilson history.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I'm big on the Mount Rushmore and all those type of debates, so that is going to be fun later on.
We'll have to have you on the Joe Mays and J-Rap show to talk of Mount Rushmore in the Philly sports. Justin and I did that a couple of years ago, and that was fun. We covered all of them: Sixers, Flyers, Eagles, Phillies, and that was a great conversation. We had a lot of fan input too. But for our Wilson top 5 quarterbacks, that's coming up towards the end of the show. But right here, right now, I think you could say that there's probably just a two-way battle for the starting job between two seniors, the returning Gannon Brubaker, who started last year in place of an injured Caleb Brown, and Brad Hoffman, who came from Berks Catholic. He is also a senior. Both of them played in the 7-on-7 on Thursday. Those are the two big names, and there's a few behind them, underclassmen that are fighting for it. But to me, it seems like we've been separated by the two seniors, Brubaker and Hoffman. What's your take on those two? Do you know much about either of them?
And I think, you mentioned it's kind of been a quiet off season. One very, very significant piece of news to pass on is that Brad Hoffman will be eligible for the District 3 playoffs if Wilson gets there. And, that's always something that's up in the air now with the new transfer rule. And he's coming in as a senior, but there are certain hardships that the District 3 will allow players to compete in the postseason. And I've spoken to Coach Doms about this. It's an awkward situation, especially at quarterback, because if you're the head coach, do you want to play someone at that position for an entire regular season and then get to the playoffs and say, okay, guys, we're going to go to a new quarterback right now?
New field general for you.
Yeah, so I don't know that he would have played quarterback. In fact, from what I've been told, he would not have played quarterback
if he had been ruled ineligible.
Correct. So that is a very significant piece of information that he will be able to compete in the District 3 playoffs, and if they would get to the PIAA state playoffs, that he would able to compete there. I first heard about Brad Hoffman when he was at Schuylkill Valley. Okay. He was a freshman, and there was a lot of promise there, and he went to Berks Catholic. I've seen him play there. He looks the part. You were at the 7-on-7. He's a big, strong kid. Physically, last year, Berks Catholic listed him at 6'2", 215. Usually people don't get any smaller,
right?
Especially when they're in my age bracket. Usually that 215 goes up a little bit as opposed to going down. If anyone has any magical advice for getting that to go down, I would certainly appreciate it. But he's a big kid. He has a very strong arm. A couple of questions. Accuracy would be one. Last year at Berks Catholic, he was around 45% for his completion rate for the season. And then the second big one is, Joe, we're talking about two totally different offenses.
Drastically different.
Right. He was in a wing T, which Coach Keeley has run there forever and has had a lot of success.
Oh, run very well.
Yeah.
Just not known for quarterback production.
Yeah, they just don't throw the ball very much. And going back to when he was with Holy Name, these were teams that were going to run the ball 40, 45 times. Now you're going to a Wilson offense that for the high school level, you don't find too many teams more balanced than Wilson if you look at run-pass ratio. And there are certain teams in this county, Wyomissing obviously is another wing T. Governor Mifflin will run, midline veer option game. So they're gonna pound the football. It's not gonna be 50-50. And it's been very successful for those schools. So it's hard to argue with that when you win as much as they do. Last year, Wyomissing won a district title. Governor Mifflin also won a district title. But how does he adapt now? And the good news is, Jeremy Palm has been on the staff over 2 decades now, former quarterback. So he'll be working with him a lot. But this offseason is going to be crucial for Brad Hoffman to learn a brand new offense, because Wilson is going to throw the ball a lot. And it's going to be a much different than a wing T where you ran a waggle and, they don't have a whole lot of passing plays. Wilson's offense, a lot of those routes are timing routes, and the ball has to be out quickly, and the ball has to be on time, and the ball has to be accurate. So that is, we're going to talk about some of the other, key contributors coming back, but you always start with quarterback.
Well, right. When we had you on 4 months ago, I had my dad texting me, when are you going to talk about the quarterbacks? Because that's what everyone, and anyone that follows it knows. Caleb Brown's graduated.
Right.
He's now playing at Penn State. What's going to happen here? Yeah. And especially we had the upheaval because there were the rumors back around when we did the show, maybe even a month earlier, that someone had moved in. There was a new quarterback in town. So, from what I saw at the 7-on-7, it was tough because I was very much looking forward to that battle, because I figured it was going to come down to the two of them. And I still believe that's the case, but unfortunately, I didn't get to see as much of Gannon. He was injured in the defensive session at the beginning, so I didn't get to see him play more than that first series. So it would have been interesting to see Gannon and Brad go back and forth and see everything thrown together in the first competition. But the other thing to note, it's interesting, we talk about this often. You've talked about it many times. We've asked Coach Doms about this. Do we like our quarterbacks playing defense?
No.
Because I didn't see Brad take any reps on defense, but Gannon was starting at safety. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen there. Could Gannon be a two-way guy? We don't see that often. Caleb was a guy, a lot was made about him over the last 2 years, playing a lot in the defensive secondary. And we know that generally the Wilson quarterbacks, you're told no. I know there's been a few in the last 25 years or so.
Our buddy Rob Walters was one.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely one.
He always reminds me every time I see him.
Starting cornerback and starting quarterback for the year. Yeah, for sure.
But it is rare.
Is that
because happen? You don't want to risk injury?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Now
Brad Hoffman, I would be stunned if he plays defense.
Right.
Because I think as of now, you do project him as the starting quarterback. Nick Krokona, is also another quarterback in the mix. Yep. But if you're asking me right now who the starting quarterback is going to be, I think it's going to be Hoffman, and I think he'll just be on offense. When you try and play somebody on defense too, sometimes at the smaller level, single A, double A, triple A, if they're that good of an athlete, your hand's forced a little bit. But Wilson has so much depth. I mean, last year's roster had close to 80 players. They've had years where they've had over 80 players.
Close to triple digits.
Right. So with that many players, usually you won't see the quarterback playing on both sides of the football.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think as of right now, the tea leaves are saying that it's probably leaning Brad, but I know it's an open competition, and I know Gannon's going to give Brad as much as he can handle. I would expect to they might not come out and say it, but I would think by the time the camp at Lebanon Valley in July is over, that they would have a clear-cut decision of who's going to be the guy. So,
yeah, you're right. They probably won't say anything. And with Wilson's program, it doesn't matter who you are. You're just not going to be handed, a starting position. It just doesn't work that way over here. I mean, they are very big proponents of the off season, and we know how important the lifting program is and getting in the weight room and putting in the time in the off season. So, it doesn't really matter who you are. With a program like this, they don't just say, here's a free pass.
Right.
You're going to be the man.
You're going to earn it no matter what. I can guarantee, Justin and I will be live on August 8th, and I'm not sure, I haven't done the schedule yet if we're going to be broadcasting our player interviews, coaches interviews, but if I talk to the coaches, they won't tell me who the quarterback is. They're not going to put that out there. Yeah. Even if Justin and I know, we won't put that out there either. And they certainly won't put that out there. They don't want Central Dauphin to know for August 27th. Prepare for both, because they could be wildly different passers. So that's the big one. Quarterback, that's where they stand. 2-man competition right now. Where there's not really a competition is at running back, because the guys that played the most snaps as a result of some injuries last year are all back. Jaden Jones, obviously big name. He got to contribute some as a sophomore, but really had a huge games last year as a junior. And we all remember the beginning of the Manheim Township game where he reeled off that big run to put Wilson up. And he's back now as a senior. Then Gavin Leonard kind of burst on the scene last year. He's kind of like that bulldozer, that bowling ball that you just can't stop him. Like, he just bounces off. He just keeps the legs churning. And he is a guy that I feel is a throwback Wilson football player, kind of more like a fullback you would have seen years ago when, Wilson still used a fullback.
Or like a Dylan Stopper.
Sure, absolutely.
Type. He might have been one. I'm trying to think of other fullback, because you're right. I mean, they don't
very rarely.
They don't use a fullback a whole lot.
It's kind of more that tight end H-back kind of.
Yeah, let's see how short yardage or goal line situations, maybe.
So Gavin is back. Get to see Jaden and Gavin back there. And I don't want to sleep on Jason Beckford either, because when he's gotten the opportunities, he's been able to produce. He's always looked great in JV games in the mop-up time. So I think he could be in for some carries there in the backfield with Jaden and Gavin as well. All seniors back there, though. So it'll be interesting to see what underclassmen develop as we look towards the years ahead. But Jaden, Gavin, and Jason, I think that's pretty good three-headed beast back there, and they're all bruisers. They may not have that breakaway guy. Like last year, Gavin's brother Mason was the speed guy.
Mm-hmm.
That may be the one thing that they're missing, at least at the surface. Maybe someone's hidden that hasn't shown themselves yet. But Jaden, Gavin, and Jason are all big bruising running backs. So maybe they do need to find that guy that'll mix it up a little.
Yeah, I think if you're ranking position groups, running back would be, if not the strongest, one of the strongest. I think their linebackers are going to be very good too, and soon you're going to hear some of the same names. Right? Yeah, but Jaden Jones is a stud. I mean, you could tell when he was a younger player coming up that he was going to be a big time back. Last year they had him at 215 pounds. He averaged about 7 yards a carry. Gavin averaged about 7 yards a carry too, and he's a physical kid. I mean, he's thick. I mean, he's put together a little bit. So, I don't have any concern about the running back position. It makes you wonder a little bit. We talked about the balance run pass. When you have those guys at running back and then you have a new starting quarterback, do they maybe dial back the passing a little bit this upcoming season and try and grind it out a little bit? Now, I'm not talking about going back to 2 tight ends and a fullback and the pride of Cole Township John Gursky days here. We're not going to see that, but I'm just wondering if maybe they do run the ball a little bit more, because that, to me, that's clearly where the strength is, that position group.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. On offense, I would say it's the one that is the deepest, has the most experience, and it'll be interesting to see if they can settle the offensive line to allow them to do some big things. And we'll get to the offensive line group here shortly, but let's talk about the receivers, both at wide receiver and I just mentioned they kind of use a tight end or H-back group. So there's a lot of names here, and I saw them rotate frequently at the 7-on-7, a mixture of seniors and some underclassmen. And I should mention at the 7-on-7, there were a fair number of important players, names that we're talking about or are going to say that were not there. So obviously 7-on-7, there's no pads, there's no linemen. And, it's just to kind of get an interesting look at where you're at this early in the summer program.
Yeah, 7-on-7s are... to be honest, sometimes I find them amusing. They're valuable. Don't get me. Any practice time is valuable, but when people put a lot of stock into a 7-on-7, I chuckle a little bit. I always think back to Mike Tyson, who had the great line that everybody has a strategy until they get punched in the face. And I think about football, when you have guys in shorts and no pads, to me, you're not finding out a whole lot about you.
Right.
You know, most coaches will tell you the game is won up front. The skill
And
players get
that out of it.
Right. The skill players get the attention, but in 20 plus years of covering high school sports, I've yet to see a quarterback throw well from his backside.
Right.
So if you can't block and protect him, it doesn't matter. Again, is it valuable practice time? Sure. You know, it's good for the skill guys to work on timing and things like that. But sometimes I think people see these 7-on-7s and project forward as if that's going to be a great team.
Right. Now, it's better. It's a good way to analyze and make personal evaluations on specific things. So on offense, obviously, are you running the right routes? Do you know the plays? Do you know when to put power on the throw or when you need to touch it? But we're not dealing with blitzes. We're not dealing with the guys in front of you. There's no running game. And the defense knows it's a pass. It's 10 and 10. Right. It's a pass. They don't have to take their run reads. The coaches will yell at them and say, you got to respect the run first, but they know it's a pass. Yeah. So, no, you're right. It's tough to – I'm just always excited for it because it's the first time I get to see the guys out there. But obviously, no, it doesn't – it's not the be-all, end-all of the – you can't be like, well, we didn't win that 7-on-7 game, so I guess we're going to have a bad year. It doesn't exactly work that way. But when you're missing the Jones brothers, John Ramsey, Josh Drake, all not there.
Yeah, those are some significant players.
Pretty big names for Wilson. So, no, they weren't there. But at wide receiver, TJ Flight, who saw plenty of time on offense and defense last year, he's back. Same thing with Sean Dendel. He played wide receiver last season. Josh Drake, who I just mentioned, he should be a two-way guy for the Bulldogs. Same thing with Spencer Tanga. He's only a junior, but played last year on defense as a returner. He will get opportunities at wide receiver, as will Evan Williams, Ofuri Odiali, Nate Capitano, and sophomore Austin Velukovic. So guys coming back, maybe not some huge names. It's been a while since Wilson had a multi-year big-time name at receiver come back, but they always seem to find a way. And some of my favorite teams from the last decade now that I think about, going back to like 2013, 2014, there were developing names there, but no big names coming back. And you don't always need those big names or even big bodies at receiver. It helps, but it's not everything. Although Dendel's got some size to him. So they definitely have a mix of quick guys and some height. It'll be interesting to see how they mix in with their tight end and H-backs, which will look to be Nick Weitzel and possibly Wes Prentice and Alex Ortiz. So lots of names there. Anyone you want to talk about?
I think, well, first, Troy Corson graduates. Yes. So, again, one of those receivers, certainly not the biggest, maybe not the fastest, but was a really good football player. For a high school player, very reliable, very experienced. He was on the field as a freshman, which is tough to do in any program, let alone
start at safety as a freshman.
Yeah, I mean, let alone when you're at a 6A school like Wilson. So he moves on, and also Corey Powers, who got time at tight end, moves on. I would agree with you. There's no one that jumps off the page right now, but if you're one of those players that you mentioned, the good news to me, if I'm in that group, is the knowledge if I work hard, I'm going to get a chance to play. That
opportunity.
Right. I mean, it's not like running back. That depth chart is pretty solid. There's not going to be Jaden Jones is going to be on the field. Wide receiver. I mean, if there's reps to be had out there. For a lot of those players that you mentioned. I don't know that there's going to be a superstar in that group, but we'll wait and see. But there's opportunity. I mean, for all those players, there's going to be a chance. And the other thing about Wilson over the years is, they change formations a lot with guys rotating on and off the field. So it's not like some teams where the top receiver has 40 catches and the next guy has 8. You know, Wilson has, I think, a lot more balance. And if you're open in the route, you get the ball. It's not necessarily focusing on one player.
I mentioned 8 names there with the wide receiver. I probably missed 1 or 2, to be honest with you. And also the thing that's important, and we've seen over the years, especially the last 5 years or so, a lot of these players will play 2 ways, but Coach Palm and the offensive staff will have a variety of receivers rotate in that maybe don't play as much on defense. They can sub guys here and there to give someone a break. So it'll be interesting to see who steps up there, because that's another position. There's a lot of bodies, but let's see who make that the top 4 or 5 guys that you're going to hear the names of. So that's what this is for. Just get the names out there, and let's see what rises to the top and is catching balls from either Gannon or Brad come Friday nights in the fall. A lot of unknowns, like I mentioned, at tight end and H-back. Nick Weitzel's a junior. I think after moving, we didn't say this on the air yet. I said it to you before the show, but one of last year's tight ends, John Ramsey, is moving to offensive line, which opened up that tight end or H-back spot, and it looks like Nick Weitzel has a handle on it right now, and he'd be an interesting one. He's a big body that could make a name for himself when the 2021 season gets started. So let's talk about the big bodies in the trenches, the offensive linemen, who we know are the most important people on the field. We all know this.
Yeah, when is someone going to create a fantasy football league
where you draft offensive linemen?
Yeah, offensive and defensive linemen. Right. And maybe you get one quarterback that you treat them like your kicker. Like at the very end of the draft.
Why did you take a quarterback so early? Take him in the last round. You don't need him. You need offensive line depth.
Patrick Mahomes goes in round 17.
Great. I love it. But so Wilson took some hits along the offensive line, losing some important players there, as they did last year as well. But they stepped up. The guys that replaced them managed to go 6-1 last year, and they'll be looking to replace 3 guys again this year. And also the guys that are returning have shuffled their positions. Now, from what I can tell, and again, there's no line at 7-on-7, so this is all word of mouth and what I can take from the spring practices that I was able to watch the video of. And again, this could change because I know there's at least 1 or 2 other guys in line for roles here. But from what I can tell...
Yeah, keep in mind, it is June, everyone.
Check back with me on August 8th. I might have a little bit of a better idea then. But returning offensive lineman Kyle Hassler is shifting out from guard to left tackle. Junior Brendan Hopp, who was in the mix last year as a sophomore, will get a chance to start as a junior, possibly at left guard, or one of the guard spots. The center looks to be senior Jack Durning, who again was one of the backups last year. And John Ramsey moving in from his tight end spot to guard. I have him at right guard right now. Again, that could change. But John Ramsey, also a senior inside now at guard. And then a starter at times, or at least a fill-in for injuries at the beginning of the season. And then one that really burst onto the scene as a freshman. Wilson doesn't have too many freshmen start or play significantly. Recently we had Nate Keller for 4 years, and now we have Jack Dendel, Sean's younger brother, will move into the starting lineup from day one this year, and now he's moved out from center or guard to right tackle, though I think a lot of these players have the ability to shift around. That's one thing that they've developed with these players is the ability to play 3 or 4 of these 5 positions, which is key as you go through a season. So right now, sophomore Jack Dendel has shifted out to right tackle. He's definitely one to watch. He has been at the prospect camps. I know he's been mistaken for guys entering their junior or senior years. And he's only a sophomore. He's what would that be? Class of 2024, I guess, graduating class of 2024 for Jack. So, we have him for a few years, which is great, and he will start I expect him to start at right tackle this year. So,
and as a freshman, they had him at 235. Again, with those linemen, that's only going to go up from there. But he was on crutches later in the season. Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately had to deal with some injuries, but definitely a player to watch. I think this is a bit of a question mark, though, this group up front. I mean, Chase Walters, who was 265, moving on. Schrufer moves on. Moss at center moves on. So again, it's Ethan Ashcroft, who played some guard, graduated as well. So just like we were talking about wide receiver, there are some openings here. Moving Ramsey. I mean, he was a big kid, so I'm not shocked. I mean, he was 6'2", 215. So obviously they can put some more weight on there, and that's one interesting note going into next season. But that those players, especially those younger guys, I mean, they're gonna get thrown into the fire now up front. And one thing about Wilson's program is sometimes you don't have as many of the multi-year starters because there are good players ahead of you, and you have to wait your turn to get in the mix there. But I think offensive line and also defensive line, those I would say are question marks right now. Now, I mean, the good news is they have all off season to get ready, but they're going to be relying on some younger players. And I know the younger classes are classes that people have said have some really good players in there. But that's a group, I think, definitely something to watch how they gel and develop before the season starts.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct there. Uh, the line is so important. It's a football cliche that everything's won there, and we talk about it all the time. Um, it'll be interesting to see how quarterback was one thing we talked about. Who's going to be the starter there? Those 5 offensive linemen are so key.
And you look at their schedule too. I mean, Wilson doesn't schedule cupcakes. Yeah, I mean, those are going to be physical. When you play Central Dolphins, I mean, that's like, Ollie Frazier. I mean, you better be ready to go for those type of games because they're certainly not going to take it easy. It may say non-league on the schedule. Those are going to be some of the most physical games.
Right.
Governor Mifflin is another team. They come off the ball. I mean, they're not going to. I mean, there's not going to be a lot of deception there. You know what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to be stout up front is very important, and there's not going to be a whole lot of time for them to get ready.
Yeah, we'll transition to the defensive side of the ball to talk about it, but I'll pull up the schedule here for everyone to see what we're talking about. And we talked about this 4 months ago, but we will know what kind of team Wilson is before October. They have their first 5 games are brutal before they get to the LL schedule. Well, first their scrimmage is against Coatesville. So it'll be interesting to see how they stack up against Coatesville because they've been a peak performing team. Now, I know the quarterback, Ortega, has, I believe, moved on. He's in the college ranks now after starting for 4 years. But they're not one to shy away from an electric offense, at least of late. And they have usually the horses that try to give a run to St. Joe's Prep and the big boys. So it'll be interesting to see Wilson hosting Coatesville on August 21st. But then you kick off the season, host Central Dauphin, go to Shillington to play Mifflin, then return to go to Exeter, which I think a lot of people don't understand how good Exeter is going to be this year. Then return home to play Martin Luther King, who we have no information on whatsoever. We were supposed to play him last year, didn't get to. It was one of those things when the LL League shifted the formats. We were looking for an extra non-league game, and that's what ended up falling out of the tree when Coach Doms and Drew Kaufman were shaking the bushes trying to figure out who's Wilson going to play. Martin Luther King stepped up. We didn't get to go down there last year, but they're coming to us on the 17th, and then we just get to finish, with ho-hum Mannheim Central. It's...
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's, Coach McNamee at Central Dauphin, I think, is one of the best in the state. They only lost 1 game last year. It was in the district playoffs. Central York really blitzed them, and Central York, I think, showed that they are the real deal with what they did in the District 3 playoffs. But, Central Dauphin is always going to be a very physical team. They have a great tradition there, kind of similar to what Wilson has done, in the LL League is what Central Dauphin has done there in the Mid-Penn. I don't need to remind your audience, Joe, about the Governor Mifflin score from a year ago and that Nick Singleton guy who, to some, it may seem like he's been in high school for 15 years. He's back again, has offers from almost all
Everyone.
of the I mean all the it's actually it's quieted down because Nick usually DMs me every time he gets a new offer. Well, now they've all pretty much
they've all
offered.
been
Yeah.
through,
I mean, when Nick Saban's calling you, you're usually a fairly good football player. So Alabama's on board. Obviously, Penn State. He's been there. And you are right about Exeter. I mean, they have guys who are going to be playing on Saturdays. Joey Schlaffer just today got another offer from Maryland. He's going to be a Division I player, big target outside, about 6'6". Still has a couple more years to go. J.R. Strauss, now people are really starting to notice him. Penn State is starting to notice him. He has multiple Division I offers, very physical player. Ty Yoakum, that's a familiar name over in Exeter. He's another kid. I mean, they all run through a brick wall. These are strong kids. And at quarterback, even though McCusker moves on, Colin Payne has been waiting in the wings, and last year might have started for a bunch of teams. He's going to come in, and he'll be the quarterback. So, that's Exeter's going to be ready to play. I mean, that's a game I think fans have been hoping to see. In Berks County, you like to see those type of matchups, and that's one certainly that they're going to circle, and you don't want to overlook them because that's already a handful of guys I just mentioned who are legitimate players. Those are certainly Strauss and Schlaffer are legitimate Division I players.
Yeah, I saw it building. We should have had the opportunity to play them last year, and the way the season getting shortened, that didn't happen. I would have been interesting to see how that game would have gone down at Gursky last year, but now this year we get to go visit them at Exeter. Right. So, yeah, it's definitely that. Those first 5 games, if they can get through that, with a winning record, they should feel accomplished. And looking at the LL League, which I don't think necessarily is going to be a very high this year, I think Manheim Township could struggle this season. I think Hempfield is the one to watch in the group that Wilson is playing, at least in Section 1.
Right, and we should point out, this is the last year for the current format. Yes. And then everything changes the following year where you have the merger with the Berks County teams, and then things are – there's some sections – Section 2, I think, is going to be – unbelievable,
right?
But that is not this year. This year is still, And I'm curious about Manheim Central because last year I thought was a rare down year.
That was a very down year. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens now. I can't recall. I think LL League is getting rid of the mandated crossovers when they're moving to the new sections because of the Berks merger. And I have the future schedules up here because the LL had already released them. We talked about this at the end of last season, even, but in 2022. The only real change is Reading's being added. That's the only real difference.
For Section 1, it's not going to be a big deal.
It happens in all the other or the other sections.
Yeah, so it's going to be Section 2, you're going to have Governor Mifflin, Manheim Central, Exeter. Warwick, Exeter, all in that.
That's a brutal section.
Yeah.
It's a brutal section.
Right.
But so it'll be interesting. I know I don't like to talk to Coach Doms or Drew Kaufman about, are you talking about the non-league schedule in 2022 before 2021 is even here? But I'm interested to see how they fill out. The first 3 games are non-league, and then they have week 6 is a non-league game. And we had talked to, I don't remember if we talked to on air to Coach Doms about this or if it was just behind the scenes about could Mifflin possibly be week 6? Could you slot it in there instead of doing it at the beginning of the year? And I think he believed that both schools were adamant to keep it Labor Day weekend to try to have it be that week, what is now week 2, or if you start with week 0, technically at week 1. They need to get rid of that.
I don't use week 0 anymore.
So the second game looks to be where Mifflin will reside. So let's look at the defense now quickly before we do our top 5 quarterbacks in Wilson's history here. Well, a lot of these names we've already mentioned, and we already kind of talked about the trenches. Big questions along the defensive line. Jeff Colson was a big-time player, multi-year starter, a huge presence inside. He's moved on now. Eli Rodriguez was his tackle mate, and he is back. He's a senior this year. I expect big things from him this year. He was kind of in Jeffrey's shadow last year, though he was always making plays. Just everyone focused on Jeffrey. Eli now is the guy there in the middle, and it'll be interesting to see who flanks him. I honestly have no idea who it's going to be. There's some big bodies that we talked about on offensive line, but are they going to transition to defense and play both ways? We talked about Hop, Hassler. At end, also, I really don't know what's going to happen. Capitano, the elder, who's now moved on.
Right.
He was a huge player on defense and special teams over the last few years. He's graduated and moved on. So guys like Nick Weitzel, Alex Worley, Wes Prentice, someone, we're going to need two or three of those guys to step up and anchor the outside. It'll be interesting to see where they slot these guys, because we've seen in years past, back in like 2018, Keller and Vanina, who you would think would play tackle, were moved out to end. Not as much speed and pass rushing prowess, but tough to run inside them when you got four big guys like that. Is that something we could see this year? Do they try Hassler outside rather than inside? It'll be interesting to see, but again, right now I cannot answer those questions at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a classic run stuffer kind of defensive tackle in Colwison, and you lose a speed rusher in Capitano at defensive end. I know over the years they've used what they call their NASCAR package, where they bring in kind of these more undersized DNs, and Capitano was only like 170, 175, but he was very fast. And those in passing situations, when it's third and long, maybe second and long, you can go to those type of guys. So I mean, up front, offensive end, defensive line is a question mark. Eli Rodriguez is going to have a big year up front. And then do we see someone like Dendel play defensive tackle? I mean, that's a decision they're going to have to make. I know they don't like to have a lot of two-way starters, but sometimes the personnel you have kind of dictates what you have to do there. So, but there's, like we talked about with wide receiver, I mean, there's playing time to be had. So if you're one of the players in those groups, you should be optimistic about that. It's not like you're going into a situation where, for example, you talked about Vanino and Keller. I mean, you knew those guys were going to be on the field all the time. I don't see a situation like that with this team.
Right. No, I agree, at least right now. But I do love every year talking about the seniors that step up, because a long time Wilson was known to have these senior classes of guys that just bide their time,
right,
and they step up and have a big senior year. I feel like we've missed that a little bit the last couple years. There'd be seniors that have great years, but they either already were starting, or you knew who they were and you knew they were ready to go. The biggest one that I think kind of defines the Wilson senior mentality was the running back a few years ago, Elijah Morales. No one knew who he was.
Yeah.
Now, inside the program, we knew the potential. And I coached
super
him
fast
at West. He was a great running back for us, but we didn't know, could he get the opportunity at the high school. And then 2018, Iggy's gone. You got Avante still an underclassman, and then Elijah just took the bull by the horns and became the guy.
Yeah, that was
he had an incredible season at a running back.
It was a great story. And you're right. Sometimes people around the county are like, where'd this guy come from? Well, he was playing behind an all-state guy.
Or behind Iggy Reynoso.
Right.
So.
He was playing behind someone who was all LL or something like that. It's sometimes when you get at these big 6A schools, as a freshman, sophomore, and sometimes even a junior, you're just, it's like we talked about earlier. You're never going to be given a spot at programs like these. You have to earn it. But yeah, that was a terrific story, and that's a great example of a kid who stuck with the program. So many times nowadays, I think you hear stories of kids who don't play right away and they just quit.
They leave.
Yeah, it's like, well, you're a 10th grader. You still have 2 more years. But people want instant access to everything,
instant gratification,
right? Yeah,
instant popularity. Yeah, you're just not going to get it.
Yeah.
People like Nate Keller and Jack Dendel, and these big names.
Chad Henne,
Chad Henne. We might talk about him a little later. Or a few years ago when John Fox and Jake Gaiman, those guys are starting as sophomores. It's rare.
Yeah, that's the exception.
Big time football, and at Wilson, it's true. generally you're senior heavy. That's just the way it works. You need to be in the program for that long. You need to learn the playbook. You need to be in the weight room. It's something that generally your freshmen and sophomores aren't ready. So stick it out. That's the biggest thing. You got to bide your time. Linebacker, you mentioned, we talked about some of these guys on offense, well, at running back, and offensive line here. Returning significant contributors in John Ramsey and Gavin Leonard. Both of them played a lot of inside linebacker at Bull and Dog for Wilson last year. So they're both returning, which is great for the team. A name you're going to hear a lot of with Ramsey and Leonard also playing significant time on offense is Ryan McMillan, who's a sophomore. I'd expect him to kind of be that third guy rotating in and playing a lot on Friday nights. He reminds me of, maybe not quite like, he's not exactly Ike Scheinauer, but he's the closest thing I feel like we've had.
Wow, that's high praise.
I'm talking about being that young and being able to play middle linebacker. Because, you don't get a lot of young kids that can start inside linebacker.
Physical position. And he was about 200 pounds last year as a ninth grader.
Right, and he was on the team as a freshman, and he was one of those guys that you could kind of see he would flash when the backups would be put in and the young kids would play. And
they only had 3 freshmen on the roster.
Right.
He was one. So
Dendel Volukovic and McMillan.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned all of their names now.
Yeah.
And I would expect Ryan to have a lot of playing time at inside linebacker this year, spelling Ramsey and Leonard, since they'll both be playing on offense. Same thing, I think you'll see Beckford in there. Jason Beckford also have the potential to play some inside linebacker.
You still have Jaden Jones, too.
And that's the thing. With him not there and his brother Cam, I wasn't exactly sure where all these guys are going to end up. Could they be shifted around a little? Because Jaden played outside last year. I would think he would stay there, but I could be wrong. I had heard that there's a potential that Cam could move to outside linebacker away from defensive back. Again, he wasn't at the 7-on-7, so I didn't see what they're going to try with either of the Jones brothers. But at outside linebacker, TJ Flight played there last year. He's back. Jaden Jones played there last year. He's back on the team. Who knows if he's going to play outside linebacker or not. And they recently moved Sean Dendel there from the defensive backfield. He's got a lot of size and could play into that outside linebacker rotation. Also getting reps were Ofuri Odeali, Alex Ortiz, and Austin Volukovic. So again, some of these guys could be moving around as the summer progresses, but that's where they played last year. That's where I saw them on the 7-on-7.
And Odeali was on the basketball team, got
important varsity minutes.
Yeah, he did, was a big guy there. I'm a huge Cam Jones fan, not just because of his physical talent. I mean, obviously he's gifted. I just love his demeanor. I mean, he's just kind of one of those kids, goes out there and plays. Has been in big games for basketball. Didn't start last year, but played starters minutes. He got a lot of time. I'm curious what they do, because last year's roster, he was listed as a quarterback, and I saw him coming up, and he did play some quarterback. I'm wondering if he goes to wide receiver. I mean, he's such a good athlete. I think they'd like to have him on the field. I think defensive back is probably a spot for him, but I just like he doesn't seem to get rattled. Just seems to be very composed. Real good basketball player too.
Absolutely, and I didn't have him anywhere on offense because I had no idea where to put him.
Yeah.
If they end up using him on offense and not just having him focus on defense, I'd expect him to be a slash athlete type of guy. Maybe run some, receiver, running back. We saw him do that at Manheim Central. He played some offense, which he hadn't done much, if at all, in the earlier games. But there's a potential for him to run, some kind of what the big thing a few years ago,
the jet sweeps.
And also, but play that the Razorback offense, where you have the slash guy come in at quarterback and run the read option with your two best athletes. Maybe the Jones brothers are back there at the same time. If you get it down right, that would be an interesting dynamic with the strength and physicality of Jaden, and then the speed and elusiveness of Cam. So, but I do not know what, if at all, Cam will be featured on offense. He would definitely be a guy to watch out for, and we'll see how it goes. But I did not get to see him at the 7-on-7, so I avoided putting him there because I had no idea where they were going to have him. But I've listed him here currently at defensive back at cornerback where he played last year as a sophomore. Also, Eric Jackson, who we saw a lot of last year, especially when Mason Leonard was injured. Eric came in to play opposite Cam. So both of them are back, saw plenty of varsity time last year. Same thing with Spencer Tenga. He will be back in the defensive backfield, and that I feel like that's his home natural position. So it's a nice, if Cam stays at corner, they've gotten 3 nice established corners that have seen significant time. And that's something in this day and age of prolific passing offenses, the more defensive backs you can have, the better. It's, would love to have Troy Corson manning the deep secondary
and Caleb
with
Brown,
these guys, and Caleb back
right
there. But they've moved on. But the outside, the boundary guys are still there. At safety, like I said, Gannon Brubaker was starting there at the 7-on-7, and he saw time there last year as well. I'd also expect Nate Capitano to fill in one of the safety roles. I think you could see it with how much teams like to pass now. Wilson used more 2 safety looks than maybe they had even just a few years ago. So right now, I think Gannon, Brubaker, and Nate Capitano would probably be those guys. But again, Josh Drake was not at the 7-on-7, and he played safety last year. So I definitely expect him to be in the rotation in the defensive secondary, as well as Rafael Fernandez and Nick Cracona, who you brought up in the quarterback discussion. I think Nick could be a very good safety. He's just blocked by a few upperclassmen at the moment, but there's a healthy rotation there. Hopefully they can find 2 guys that'll stand out, or maybe they've just got a whole bunch that they can rotate in and keep everyone fresh. But is there anyone besides Cam who already spoke with that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of the guys who are going to be in the mix there, but I would stress that's a very important group, because when you look back at some of the tough games Wilson's had in recent years, the opponents had big days passing the football. I mean, think about Ivy at Manheim Township, that district playoff game against Harrisburg, where they had so much speed on the outside. Warwick.
Yeah, that's not
right. So
that is a game that I never want to talk about ever again. And I know all the coaches completely agree.
Yeah. So I just bring those up to mention that it's important because Caleb, they didn't like to use much in the secondary because he was so important on offense at quarterback. But with him and Corson gone, those are experienced players, and Caleb was extremely fast. So you could try and match him up with others. I think Drake will definitely be in the mix. I would expect Cam Jones to be in the mix too. So we'll see. But with how many teams now are going to the spread, you have to be able to cover.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. So that's kind of our quick, well, not so quick overview of names to watch, players to keep an eye on or keep an ear out for as we approach the season. And again, Justin and I will hopefully have more clarity on some of these positional battles and who's playing where and when we come back for our next show on August 8th. Before we move on to the final discussion about all-time Wilson quarterbacks, I do want to post here the more recent awards for the lead dog that came out. We talked about this 4 months ago. The 2021 Lead Dog Award created by the players and the coaching staff for players that have stepped up and have kind of taken control of the off-season program. But now we're in the summer, so I believe this is done for now. I'm not sure they're going to do this during the summer or the season. But I have the 4 most recent ones up here. Previously, in between our last show and the start of this show, they also recognized the returning quarterbacks were also each given a Lead Dog Award. But the 4 most recent here were Gavin Leonard, Wes Prentice, Jason Beckford, and TJ Flight, which shouldn't be a shock, as we mentioned all of them multiple times for our offensive and defensive discussion. So it's good to see these guys stepping up in the offseason, specifically in the classroom, the weight room, and in leadership roles. So we want to thank the presenting sponsors, Remax of Reading and Time to Rise Fitness, for the Lead Dog Award, and to Gavin, Wes, Jason, and TJ for earning it over the last few weeks. All right, so Paul, I'm going to throw you into the fire immediately here. We're actually going to go. We're going to go over your list completely, and my list, and as we talked about before, they're very similar. So if let's just focus on yours for the moment. We can get to mine maybe right before we end here. But we are going to talk about all-time Wilson quarterbacks. And I know I don't pull up the comments during the show, but I know there will be people during and after that will have a lot to say about these type of lists that we do. And when you're talking quarterbacks, people are always going to have a lot to say. And obviously, we can only pick 5. So there are going to be people left off. And it is not to belittle anyone that has played the position at Wilson. It's just for fun. So don't take it too seriously. Okay. We usually don't have problems with people fighting in the comments, but I just want to put that out there that this is just, I thought we would have more time to talk about it. So I wanted to have something prepared. And yeah, so we're going to talk top 5 quarterbacks at Wilson. And from the outset, Paul, I think we both were in agreement that you pretty much have to start with a guy in the late 80s and go to current, because Wilson just wasn't a passing offense from the late 40s through the majority of the 80s.
Right. And what makes this really difficult is a couple things. Number one, there aren't a whole lot of high schools in the state of Pennsylvania that have the quarterback tradition of Wilson. All right. You have 2 pros here. I'm talking NFL level. And obviously Shane Stafford, has been a pro as well. So that makes it difficult. And also, style of play changed completely from Gursky Slemmer era to then Jim Cantafio taking over, and they were throwing the ball all over the place. But my number one, and now I'm wondering if I gave them to you in the right order, Joe, but my number one is Chad Henne.
I have the list. I'm going to put your whole list up.
Okay.
I interpreted this correctly because I figured Chad wasn't 5, so I kind of flipped it.
Okay.
And I put Chad at number 1. So I have your whole list up here for everyone.
Okay, I'll do them in order though for you now officially. But I have Chad number 1, and covered his very first game. It actually got rained out. There was lightning. They were playing Harrisburg. It got moved to a Saturday. But a 4-year starter. Threw for over 7,000 yards, over 70 touchdowns. He could do it all. He had all the physical tools you could ever want. I mean, look at the career he's made in the NFL by, being a team player. I think that's a big part of it. He's in a great fit now with Kansas City. They love him out there. But people also forget Chad was a guy who could run. Now, when he went to Michigan, he looked slower, and in the NFL now, he looks a little bit slower because those guys all run 4.4, 4.5.
Cleveland Browns might disagree with you after that performance in January.
But I mean, Chad could run, and he had a rocket for an arm, and he also knew the playbook inside. He could run. By the time I don't even know if it was senior year. I'd probably say junior year. He could basically run what he wanted to run. I mean, he
could be co-offensive coordinator with Coach Cantafio.
Yeah, I mean, he knew what he was doing there. Also, Coach Cantafio always used to tell me that he'd be a great poker player because, he never got too high or too low. I mean, he had perfect demeanor. Like when you saw Chad, you knew that was a pro. You were watching it. At the high school level, the very few quarterbacks I've seen in person that were that good. Jeff Smoker from Manheim Central certainly comes to mind. But Chad could do everything. So I put him number 1. I put Kerry Collins number 2, got to a state final. So obviously a lot of great players on that team, but they were 14-1, only Wilson team to get to a state final. However, in the analytics age that we now live in, Joe, people would look at those numbers and they'd think you're crazy. I mean, it may surprise people. Kerry only completed 45% of his passes, 20 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. But another reason I rate him so highly, he had all the physical attributes. I mean, could have been a pro baseball player. There were scouts, just like they come and watch Luke Holman now. Carey was throwing plus 90.
Pretty good basketball player, too.
Yeah, physical player. I mean, Carey's baseball team, they got to a state final. A lot of people don't talk about that. They lost to Bethel Park in the state championship game, and Carey was a big piece of that on the mound. So I have him number 2, and those are 2 NFL quarterbacks. Number 3, and maybe people could flip-flop 3 and 4. I thought my top 4 were pretty solid here. Number 3, I put Chris Adams, who was on the 90 team that went 12-2, won a district title. Again, they didn't throw the ball. He had 13 touchdown passes and 4 interceptions. So I have him 3, and I have Shane Stafford 4. I thought about switching those. If someone did, I would, have no issues with that at all. Shane, of course, phenomenal basketball player too. One thing I want to point out quickly, because we live in this age now where parents feel they have to specialize their kids into one sport and one track. These guys you just mentioned were all multi-sport guys.
Yeah.
So if you think that the only way your son or daughter is going to be Division I is if they only play one sport, you're dead wrong, and you're ruining a lot of opportunities that they have from being with friends and teammates and having success. Look at this past year. Luke Holman had a blast playing basketball. Hadn't played since he was a youth. So I have Shane number 4, 93 grad. And then number 5 was tough for me because Zach Zweizig is one of my favorite Wilson players of all time for basketball and football, just because of his toughness. And I think a lot of people think Wilson, they think tough, hard-nosed, blue-collar kids. And that was Zach Zweizig. He also has the most passing yards per game in Wilson history. Almost 180 passing yards per game for Zach.
But he has this single season yardage record, doesn't he? For one season?
He had more than Chad?
I thought so.
I'm looking at yards per game, but
we both have our tradition.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right, Joe. Yeah, 2,300.
Yep.
And Seth Klein was actually second, ahead of Chad. So yeah, so Zach's numbers are phenomenal, and I still think his basketball team would have won a district title if he didn't have a hand injury. But that's another story. But having said all that, I put Tony Sapola number 5. The stats are definitely in his favor. His completion percentage was 66%. Phenomenal baseball player, too, for Wilson and for the West Lawn Owls. The 99 team was 12-1. So he checks a lot of the boxes there. So that was my 5. Henny 1, Collins 2, Adams 3, Stafford 4, Sapola 5. And I hate leaving out Zweizig, but if we're limited to 5, those are the guys I'm going with. And I just checked my Twitter, and I saw that Big Mike Stahl had the same 5 as me.
Same order, too?
I'm not sure if he put his in order or not. I think he might have. Our order is not the same, but it's the same 5. The reason I like that is he works for a distributor, so I like my Aldo beverage. And also, Mike Stahl is a very large human being. So, I'd rather be
with me is a good thing then.
Yes.
So, I accidentally flip-flopped two of yours, so I apologize for that. I thought you had Shane at 3 and Chris at 4.
I might have. You know what? I might have just flip-flopped that on my drive over.
It was close, right?
Yeah, it was. And if you talk to different coaches, they'll have different opinions as well.
So I was working myself into knots over this, trying to figure out how was I going to clarify or pare down this list because, well, to be honest, I knew who 3 or 4 of them were. I was 3, definitely 4. I was pretty confident, but that 5th spot, there's probably 10 guys that I could easily talk myself into for that 5th spot.
And there are other quarterbacks in the Quintafio era that their numbers are going to look a lot more impressive than some of the guys that I mentioned.
And that's the toughest thing is comparing eras. And even though you're saying, well, you're only really talking about guys from the last 30 years, but even so, the Carey offense and even the one that Chris and Shane worked, there was all the quarterbacks from Carey through Chad, like that 12-year period. 13-year period or whatever it was. Just phenomenal quarterback play.
There was one period of time where at the college level,
every level,
right,
yep.
Division 1, 2, and 3, the highest rated quarterback
Or
in the
Wilson
country was a
quarterbacks.
Wilson
Yeah.
graduate.
Incredible feat. Yeah, who were all three of them now? I can't remember. It was Carey at Penn State. It was Shane at UConn. And who was it was at Gettysburg? Was it Gettysburg? Was it
I thought it was Chris, but
yeah, I thought it was Chris too, but now I'm talking myself out of it. Anyways, yeah, that's in the stat book.
Oh, isn't
here.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's somewhere in here.
It's a
end.
great. Can people get those at the games, Joe?
Yeah. So this
it's awesome. If you're a Wilson fan,
yeah,
it's
so
awesome.
This is the most recent. It's through the 2019 season. It's the history of Wilson football. It's mostly a statistics book. It was started by Rich Romick years ago, and Doug has taken over it since Rich passed away. And Coach Doms works on it, in all his spare time that he has, because he's got nothing else to do.
He sleeps about 3 hours a day. It was Adams at Gettysburg.
It was Adams. Yep. Okay, so you can get these at the home Wilson games. I don't know if they'll have it for the Central Dauphin game. You might have to wait till the Martin Luther King game. But if you're a dues paying member of the Tradition Club, you get it for free. If not, they're $5. And if you're interested in Berks County football, Wilson football, history, stats, this is definitely a book you want to have. And Paul and I each used it for our discussion here. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my list because, like I said, it's almost identical to yours. It's very, very close. The top three, if you go by what my interpretation of your top three was, our top three is exactly the same. It's Chad, Carey, and Shane. Okay. And I also have Tony on my list. I just moved him up from 5 to 4.
Okay.
Chris Adams was in the conversation for my 5 spot, but like I said, when I started talking about my list, I had a tough time figuring out what I wanted to use as criteria. And at one point I was like, I was kind of looking at guys maybe multi-year starters. But there were too many single season quarterbacks at Wilson because it's tough to start as an underclassman at any position. Right. That there were too many great quarterbacks that only played for 1 year. And Chris Adams is a prime example because
came right after
Kerry Collins guy in front of him, which tends to happen fairly frequently with guys at positions that are studs and only a senior gets one shot and then they have a great year. And Chris Adams is a prime example. He's one that I kept thinking of. Do I have him at 5? But because you had him on your list, I was like, I need to have some kind of differentiation in there. And we've already mentioned a few guys that I thought about putting in my number 5 spot. You mentioned Zach Zweizig. We talked about Seth Klein, mentioned him. Another one that I was very interested in considering and looking at was Connor Urig. I think he is an underrated guy because he also offered that dual threat, very good as a runner.
Tough kid.
Yeah. Very tough kid. It just, like I said, there's a large amount of people that you could consider for that 5th spot. But the guy that I ended up going with is Jake Templin. Because his season in 2014 was just phenomenal. He broke Chad's record for touchdown passes in a season.
They were slightly different physically.
Slightly different, yeah. But he was deceptively quick. I mean, there was one, I remember watching this from the sideline where they're running the read option and everyone thinks that probably Dantzler had the ball, and next Jake's running down the sideline. No one is anywhere close because they ran that play so well. And he wasn't the fastest guy, but he was quick and he knew what he was doing. And he sat behind Matt Timochenko and only played for 1 season as a quarterback and went on to have a phenomenal season for that team. And I know there'll be people that argue with me about that and how am I not picking these other guys. But and I've said this on the show many times, and I say this every time I put out my best of list or all decade list. I have a huge soft spot for the 2014 team. They are probably my favorite team to have watched at Wilson since I moved back to the area. I loved that 2014 team. They were great. And again, just like we're saying, it's not a dig at any of the other teams, just like it's not a dig at any of their quarterbacks. It's just for fun. But yeah, that 2014 team I thought was incredibly special. Loved watching them play. And the class before them and the class after them were phenomenal. So that was kind of a great great group that had come together, and Jake was the field general for that team.
Yeah. Colin Powers was after that,
He
and
was the next year.
had an unbelievably good season.
He was competing with Jake Klein. There was the talk, like, there was the two guys going head to head, and they gave it to Colin, and Jake got to play defense then at outside linebacker.
And Powers was 18 touchdowns, 2 interceptions.
Yeah, and all he did was be incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
And he's another guy that...
Steve Huber was the quarterback
guy
on the 2008 team that Coach Doms has told me was the best defense in Wilson history.
Right.
So when you think about that team, I always think about their defense first, but his numbers were terrific.
And he was a multi-year starter. I think he eventually started as a sophomore. I think that was kind of a situation. That was when I was not in the area, so I'm not as crystal clear with the 06, 07, 08, those teams. I did get to see the 2008 team win the district championship when they housed Cumberland Valley. That was an annihilation, unlike anything I had ever seen. But yeah, Steve Huber, another one that I thought about, can I put him at 5? And all the people we just mentioned, you can make a case for, and I'm not going to be like, no, you're wrong.
That's what makes these topics so much fun.
It's so fun.
Right. It's not, it's like when people debate Jordan and LeBron or LeBron and Kobe. It's not like you're saying one's good and one's terrible. They're all good. Like, anyone with any common sense knows they're all really, really good. These are all stars, but it's just, in some ways, how you decide what your criteria is for ranking these. And like I said at the top, Wilson's football history makes this extremely difficult because they were an I formation, run it down your throat type of team, and then switched to the exact opposite of that when Jim Cantafio took over. So you'll see numbers, like we mentioned, Seth Klein throwing for 2,100 yards. Zweizig throwing for 2,300 yards. So you'll see more recent quarterbacks that have bigger numbers. But I would say if you took Kerry Collins or Chris Adams or Shane Stafford and put them in those offenses, don't you think they would also put up monster numbers? They would. They certainly would.
Well, and I always like to think back. Baseball always comes up to me. Modern baseball versus baseball 100+ years ago. Everyone talks about, is Babe Ruth the greatest baseball player ever? If you put him in modern game with all the modern performance assessments and training, I'm gonna guess he probably would be pretty good. But you can't necessarily compare numbers through eras and generations. It's tough, but that's what makes this conversation so much fun. And I appreciate the people that have suggested this, and depending on what criteria you use, your list could be massively different than ours. I feel like a few of them would overlap, but there's certainly a case to be made for many of the people. And I know I didn't include the most recent crop of graduates, so I didn't even consider throwing Caleb Brown in there. But as soon as I get that new stats book,
runner,
his name's going to pop up there in the quarterback list a lot. And like you said, in terms of dual threat, or the guy that posed headaches for defenses as a runner, if he had a full season last year, he would have had over 1,000 yards rushing as a quarterback.
Yeah, he averaged 11 yards a carry from the quarterback position, and last year was the shortened year, so that's going to impact his numbers. But scariest running the football, he clearly was that guy with the type of speed that he had. If he got to the second level, he was going to be gone. So what was your 5 again?
So
in order?
Was the same. So Chad was 1, Kerry was 2, Shane was 3. I bumped Tony up to 4, and then had Jake Templin at 5.
Okay, and
then about 7 other guys that I had under consideration for that 5th spot. So that's where I went. Very similar to you, and I can't say that us being basically identical didn't have some input into where my number 5 went, because Chris Adams was right near the top of my list as well. But it's fine. You want to give us your 5? I'd love to see it. Leave it in a comment, email it to me, post it in the Tradition Club, post it on Twitter. Tag me and Paul on Twitter with your list of your all-time top 5 quarterbacks at Wilson. And I would love to see it, and maybe Justin and I will mention it on the next show.
Running back is another fun one to do.
Maybe next time you're on, we'll have to tackle the running backs.
Yeah, it's a loaded position.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
That's much. I had a much harder time doing running backs than quarterbacks, to be honest. It was,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
That's
yeah.
another show, though.
That would be, yeah, we could talk another
Yeah.
hour just about Wilson running backs for sure. So, anything else, Paul, you want to say about Wilson football as we enter the 2021 summer, getting ready for the return of Friday Night Lights?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be nice to have a regular schedule back, and fans. Yeah, last year was just it was really difficult, and then districts getting cut down. I mean, and we know the impact that
Yeah.
had, but I mean, especially at the bigger school level, only having 4 in there, but. I mean, it's funny because I was telling people that I was going to be on this show, and then they'll say, "Is Wilson going to be good?" I said, "Well, they haven't had a losing season since 1963, so it's not about are they going to be good. It's a matter of the scale that they're always going to be good. Are they going to be great? Are they going to be district championship good?" That's the issue. They're
Mhm.
never going to be bad. There's too much coaching experience there, too much time, dedication put in. I'm curious to see. I mean, new quarterback. We talked about up front. Uh, I don't know that this is a team on paper that's going to wow a lot of people outside of the Wilson community. I don't think they're going to look at this particular Wilson team and say, this is going to be a juggernaut, type of team. But we've gave some great stories of these seniors that nobody hears of because they've been sitting behind really good players, and now they get a chance. And you saw them the year before, and they were 185, and now they're 210. It's a different kid. So I think for the players, there's a lot of time that's going to be available if they put in the work.
You mentioned the history and the tradition and the streak. Keep the streak is a big thing. That's one of the membership levels of the Tradition Club, is keep the streak alive, and you donate the amount of what the streak is going to be as you hope this season comes to a close. One of the teams of the last decade that, I say 2014 is always the one I reminisce about the most, but the class right before them was always very interesting to me because you had that incredible 2012 team with Junior Joseph headlining, all those guys. That was a stacked unit. Everyone was excited how far they made it in 2011, of what could happen in 2012, and of course then they won the district championship in 2012. But all those guys graduate, all those big names that have been there. Yeah, and that amazing defense that they had, one of the best defenses that Wilson's ever had, right up there with those units from the late 70s, early 80s, and 2008, numbers wise. 2013 came in, and the predictions were that, not from Wilson, the LL previews and stuff, that Wilson would struggle to win 6 games. That was the thing. Well, this isn't your typical Wilson team, blah 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 blah. And then all they did was go undefeated and be a Joey Julius kick away from making the district championship.
Oh man!
They got booted by Lower
Dolphin.
On, Joe's big toe on a high 40, like a 47, 48-yard field goal, right before Thanksgiving, I believe it was that game. It was disappointing, but they were 12-1 on a team that everyone said would struggle to win 6 games. And that's just to say, you might think you don't know the people, you might not know the players. Too many big names are gone, but it doesn't always matter. And we've seen it year after year at Wilson that people just step up. Who's next, and are you ready? So it'll be interesting to see if these Bulldogs are able to do something that maybe some people don't think they can do, especially with that early season schedule.
Yep, and losing a quarterback like Caleb Brown, but the consistency they have in the coaching staff, and why missing, which obviously is another phenomenal program. It's the same there. I mean, you see these, not only Coach Wolfram, but when I go cover these games, it's the same assistant coaches year after year. I mean, they're there for decades and that's how you build something up to the way the expectations are so high. Now, with that, they say heavy lies the crown. Wilson goes 8-4, and it's like the apocalypse just came through Spring Township.
It happened 2 years in a row.
Yeah,
people were, oh boy, what's going on?
Right,
here?
But also, I would also say this, because we went through the schedule. that is a brutal run. So at the end of the year, if they have a cup, don't just look at a wins and losses column. Who did you play? That's you always have to look at that. Is some teams may be undefeated, some teams may have 4 losses. Maybe the 4-loss team's better than the undefeated team because of who they played,
and
as opposed to the
playoffs.
Cupcake. Yeah,
all the
right.
time you have teams from other leagues that come in with an inflated schedule or inflated win-loss record because they didn't play anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the power rankings try to take that into consideration. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when you get to settle it on the field, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so the focus always should be, obviously they want to beat Mifflin, they want to win the section title, but make the playoffs and make some noise there. Maybe you have some early season struggles, but that helps you focus, figure things out, and then make a run later.
Right.
Because if you end up going to or winning the district championship, no one's going to care how many losses you have.
No.
It doesn't matter.
You don't get trophies and medals in September.
Right. Exactly. So, well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me and, pinch hitting for Mr. Raffoff.
Big shoes to fill.
He better be careful or he might be on the outs. I don't know. I got
When's his contract up?
I got people texting me for his head all the time.
Oh, geez.
That's usually just my dad giving him a rough time. But no, we appreciate everything Justin does for the shows here, and we're excited to have him back for the next Bulldog Hour again, which should be in August 8th, I believe. We will have some interview to get ready for the season, which by that point will be less than 3 weeks away. But yeah, so Paul, thank you so much for coming to the Bulldog Hour studios.
Sure thing. Yeah, fun topics. Thanks for having me.
A great discussion. And when we do get you back on the show, we will have to talk running backs. That would be fun. Maybe we'll have to make it a top 10.
And my final note, thank you to John Rahm. My DraftKings account says thanks.
Yes. Well, congratulations on that victory that you played a large part in.
Yeah.
And
those 2 windy putts he made, that was all me.
That was you.
Mentally.
Please.
Yes.
So thanks for listening to this episode of the Bulldog Hour. Again, we'll be back in about 6 weeks or so with another show. But until next time, go Bulldogs, and everyone sign off here. And Paul and I are going to go watch the fourth quarter of the Sixers game, and they need some help. But if we're flipping the script from what they had done in games 4 and 5, then we're in for a good night.
Could it be a live wagering opportunity?
There you
here,
go.
Joe.
There you go. So, all right. Thanks everyone for watching this episode of the Bulldog Hour, and we'll be back again real soon.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Bulldog Hour. Want more Wilson football? Follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud, or visit www.bulldoghour.com. The Bulldog Hour is a featured program on jmnjrradio.com.